morning. Welcome to Viewpoint, your program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. This morning we'll leave the politicians out for a while. We'll bring one on here one of these days. Tim Butler is booked at a later date. Maybe we'll do some others down the line, see if they behave themselves. Perspectives, we're going to cover that very shortly, and we certainly have a personality. Usually we start with kudos, and I'm going to have Mrs. Busby do that. It's time she kind of pulled her own load here. Let us sit here and smile. But I want to...
I don't get no respect.
Judith K., you'll recall that for years I've been going down to the honor flight. Welcoming the troops home, which is something I enjoy doing, and had an interesting experience last night. A couple of the old gentlemen, they were just moved to tears, and they were just almost sobbing. It's a unique experience, and I've been doing it ever since I was able to go on the honor flight, Tommy, and I had an interesting thing coming home last night. The fellow that was driving backed his car out because it was a little tight quarters there to open the door. And the other gentleman opened the door and got in. And I started reaching for the door and the car drove away. And it was about a block down the road and I'm yelling. Some young fellow saw my plight and he ran for him. And happily they had to stop because of the flow of traffic. And it got to him, and he told him, and the traffic started going, and they drove off again. Well, I want to tell you, that kind of raises your estimate of your own self when there's a walk off there and leave you in Springfield.
Maybe you need new friends.
Yeah, I'm going to find some new friends. I'm not to protect the innocent. To protect the innocent, I'll only use their initials. It was Orville Schaefer and Wayne Shealy. And they just blithely drove off, left the old fellow standing there, wondering what the heck's going on.
Oh.
So I may not have coffee with them anymore for a long time. I think they told me where I placed it. Okay, we got some subject matter we want to talk about, but first, Mrs. Busby, why don't we get into the kudos a little bit here? Doesn't
life just have the darndest way of keeping you humble?
Oh, yeah. I want to tell you right away, I knew I wasn't very important with those two.
New friends are
standing there waving and not able to run after them.
All you could do is stand there and whimper, huh?
I envisioned grabbing a cab, and I thought, boy, this is going to be an expensive night.
Oh, dear heaven. Well, you could have called me. I'm always home. Except on Wednesday mornings from 8:15 to 9, I'm not home. I've got a couple of kudos here. Bill gave me a turn. And the first one is that come Monday at 6:30 in the evening, Lincoln Community High School is going to have a ceremony and name the stage for Mr. Dan McLaughlin. Anybody in this town who has had children who have gone to Lincoln Community High School will recognize that name.
And also,
you know, he had
players.
What?
Community theater too.
Oh, yes.
Some outstanding performances there.
And also, now where was I?
Well, you were talking about it. The fellow's name was Dan McLaughlin. We're going to honor him.
Oh, and he also had consistently winning debate teams, speech teams, all that whole department just swept the contests annually. It was just, maybe it got to be ho-hum. You can say something because he's your dad.
Yeah. So, I wouldn't say it was ho-hum. It's one of those things where once you started winning, it almost becomes addictive. You want to win more and more, and it helps really build the program because then people want to be in the program.
Of course.
But it was always a great feeling to know that Lincoln High School was perennially, every year, was a team to be reckoned with within the entire state. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that was always a great feeling.
Well, I have absolutely no quarrel with basketball. Football, I love. But the chances of your playing either after a very young age are slim to none. And to be able to speak to people is such a lucky thing, because that's the greatest fear for most of the people in the known world.
Well, I think that's how my dad just touched so many lives, was
Yes.
not necessarily, I mean, there were many state champions through his 27 years, but more importantly was the people who had that fear of speaking in front of people, or just didn't understand how to look people in the eye and speak clearly.
Yes.
And they learned things, even just way back in high school, that you use the rest of your life. So anytime you make a presentation or really just deal with the public at all, you learn things in those 4 years in speech that you can take on the rest of your life that help you out.
Oh, it's just a wonderful thing. Yeah, it is.
Well, Tom, I want to tell you, way back in the good old days, quote, we had a fellow named Clarence Miller, who it was Dan's job there at that time, 30s and to the war. He enlisted in the war and was subsequently killed, unfortunately. But we had the National Forensic League is what, and you'd get points for so many, you do this, and you do that, and you get some. And it was a big deal to put on your certificate you had so many points. Point being that they would have a national conventions, for want of a better word, and there would be competition. And we had two national champions. The coach, Clarence Miller, in after-dinner speaking,
Yep.
and Dick Goodman in humorous, what they called it, declamation in those days.
Yes.
Yeah.
Humorous declamation. Dick, unfortunately, died very, very young, but he was he was a talent. He was a very, very funny man. So those experiences, about how many years is that? Early 30s, late 30s, early 40s. Let's get serious about that.
Can I do one more thing?
Well, I wish you would. You sit here and do nothing all day.
Such baggage he has to carry. I'd also like to tell people that from 7 to 11 a.m., of course, because it's a pancake breakfast, on the 24th of this month at the Oasis Senior Center is a pancake breakfast, pancake and sausage and fruit cup and apple or orange juice and coffee. Children under 5 are free because they don't eat anything, they just spill it on the floor. And adults are $6, and you can get tickets at the Oasis or from any of the board members. So please support the Oasis. It supports an awful lot of people.
Yeah, they do. And to tend to that conversation, I'm glad for Dominic, but I'm very sorry to see lose Dominic as a director out there. Dominic Dolpas does a great job for us. I don't go out there very often. That's for older people. I don't have much time for them.
Don't you like old people?
Well, not those that leave you in the street.
Well, there's that.
Well, now listen. You've sat here and hogged the whole show all morning long. You just as well introduce our guest now.
Oh, I know. He goes to my church.
Well, don't hold that against him.
Tom McLaughlin.
Good morning.
Is the director of the Heritage Museum at Lincoln College. If you've not been there, you have missed something. The first time we went, we were pretty fresh from the new museum in Springfield. And when we got in there, Cass said, "Holy cow." She said, "This is better than the Springfield Museum." It is just a find. Don't miss it, please.
That's not an unusual expression. We've had other people. Gene and I volunteer on Thursdays there, and that's not an unusual expression for people. So this is kind of cut above the Springfield.
It's always been nice.
It's an entirely different modus operandi, and that's
absolutely. I feel like we complement what the Presidential Museum does. The Lincoln Heritage Museum at Lincoln College, we really spend a lot of our time on Lincoln's pre-presidential life, or his pre-beard life, I like to call it. We try to look at different characteristics and see what made Lincoln Lincoln. The motto of the museum is "Learn from Lincoln, live like Lincoln." And so what we do is we look at different characteristics of empathy, empathy, honesty, vision, perseverance, things to that nature. And we relate those stories to what's happening in the real world. And the whole goal of the museum is an hour after you leave, 2 hours after you leave, there's still something about Lincoln's story that sticks with you. And when you're out in the real world and, facing real world issues, that maybe you can learn something from Mr. Lincoln's life that maybe makes the world a little bit better. So.
Tommy, you mentioned two words that are really important, the real world. The real world says that it takes money, and a lot of money, to sustain our wonderful museum out there. So if I may be permitted to put a commercial pitch in and remind people that there's always a need out there, and you don't have to wait for somebody to pass into the great stage beyond. You can do that. Interesting thing, people will have contributions given to the college in somebody else's name. That's a pretty neat thing, and it's kind of a humbling thing too. But so I just want to mention that there's an opportunity for you to think about Lincoln College, not just at the time of somebody's death, but think in terms of making a contribution in somebody's name, and it'll honor them while they're still here.
Absolutely. And Lincoln College and the Lincoln Heritage Museum as well, we're both 501c3 nonprofit organizations. So we, at least from a museum standpoint, we rely very heavily on our donations of those who support the museum. And through those donations, we're able to do some of the extra community events that we do, such as our lecture series, our living history presentations, or
excellent.
Heritage Highlights, as the lovely Mrs. Jean Gossett came up with the name. She was our interviewer when we did our living history presentation. So she interviewed our characters throughout the summer, and then we still have a couple more events this year, but we're able to do these things and make these free events through the support we receive from the community. So it really is, by supporting the museum, we're able to give back to the community as well.
And we have the big soiree coming up very soon.
Absolutely. September 30th.
Just touch on that a minute, Tommy. We probably can expect another couple or two. Go a little smoke for the soiree.
Sure, absolutely. The Grand Soiree is the major fundraising event of the year for the Lincoln Heritage Museum. This year, it's Mr. Lincoln Goes to Hollywood. It's going to take you back into the glitz and glamour of old Hollywood. We have some really neat, a really neat theme this year. The event has all sorts of great things, a wonderful meal. We have silent and live auctions, dancing, all sorts of fun stuff to do. And it all goes to support the Lincoln Heritage Museum and our efforts to keep conserving our items and having these free community events we have. So tickets are still available. If you want to get tickets, there's two different ways. You can either get on the internet to museum.lincolncollege.edu or simply call the advancement office at Lincoln College at 735-7217. But tickets are still available, but we're looking forward to a great evening on Saturday, September 30th.
You sound like me. My Rolodex is so full of telephone numbers, I can't remember my name.
The worst one is when somebody asks you your own phone number because you never call yourself, and you really, almost sometimes you pull your phone out and say, what is my number? So.
The auction of donated items is always a nice part of that soiree. And I'd like to mention again that honorary trustee, former Senator Larry Bomke, always makes it a point to make us a nice gift that can be auctioned off.
Absolutely.
And
they've got a wonderful package this year, too. I've been talking with Mrs. Bomke, and we've just made a small addition to it, so you'll have to get there to see it, but it's a really neat little neat auction package that the Bomkes have put together. And something else that actually, for the listening audience, since I believe this channel plays country music, is that correct? Yes, I thought so. I was like, that's on my radio right now. It's like, that's what I thought. We this year have two autographed signed guitars from Keith Urban and Kelly Pickler. Two country musicians, and so it's definitely even another reason to come to the Grand Soiree. You can come have a wonderful meal, and you get a chance to bid on a really one-of-a-kind item. So we're really excited to have it.
That is so great. I think Senator Bomke must have studied Abraham Lincoln because the character traits that you mentioned a little bit ago that just aren't in vogue anymore.
That's a very nice thing to say, Judith Kay.
He exemplified those same kinds of things.
Absolutely. And when we have our guests at the museum, I try to relate depending on who the audience is, relate the characteristics and try to put it into a real-world setting. For instance, being on the campus of Lincoln College, we have athletic teams, and from time to time we'll have a team come through the museum as almost a team-building exercise, and we'll talk about perseverance, and where, such as for if your team is on a losing streak or your star player breaks their ankle and they're going to be out for a couple of games, so having setbacks and being more like Lincoln, where, as you know, Lincoln had several personal and political setbacks, but he kept going and kept moving forward. So trying to take that characteristic and relate it to the athletic team, just saying you may be on this losing streak, but be like Lincoln and just keep trying, keep moving forward. So
Abraham Lincoln probably could have played basketball if
Absolutely.
they had invented it by the.
He could have. He was a tall gentleman.
I was forward on his team.
I used to make that joke to my dad when he had retired. I said, "You've been teaching so long. When you started teaching at the high school, I think Abraham Lincoln was a sophomore." Didn't always laugh at that joke, but I thought it was funny. So.
That's a good one. Could you just give a little Reader's Digest synopsis of the technology behind this museum? Because to my mind, it's the only one I've ever seen that has been set up like this, which makes it even more enjoyable to young people.
Well, the first floor, there's 2 floors to the museum. Your first floor is very much of your traditional museum setting.
Static displays.
Yeah, we have standing displays. We do have one display that changes from year to year. This year it's based on courage, so another characteristics of Lincoln's. But the first floor, your artifacts are behind glass. You can't touch anything. Still can learn a lot, but you obviously can't touch. Now upstairs, completely different. You can touch everything. That's a part where you can see, touch, and hear history. It's an audio-visual interactive experience. They look at the approximately 9 hours between when Lincoln was shot and when he actually succumbed to this wound. And the thought is, in those 9 hours, people can potentially go through what's called a life review or a film strip of memories. And what we get to do as the guest is get to go through this life review with Mr. Lincoln, where you could almost feel him standing next to you, pointing, saying, "I remember this law book," or "I remember this axe," or "this plow," or whatever it may be. So it's the way I look at it, and again, coming from a teacher family, when there's a class and the teacher's up there teaching to the students, and if the students aren't necessarily paying attention or they're not engaged, it's very difficult for the teacher. It's more of a monologue. It's not, you don't get as much out of it. But in those classrooms where the students are engaged and asking questions and there's conversation back and forth, it's a dialogue. And in my opinion, I feel like the students would walk out of that class going, something would stay with them. So the second floor is more of a dialogue feel, in my opinion. So yeah, it's very unique.
And the company that was able to accomplish this was an Illinois company, wasn't it?
It was. Taylor Studios out of Rantoul, Illinois.
Out of which where?
Rantoul.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yes, Taylor Studios, and I read, Tom, where they are known worldwide for their work.
Absolutely.
And if you'll recall, Mark McDonald, our friend, his Illinois Stories, he did a feature on them one time. And it's just fascinating what they have in inventory and how they create their own props and so forth.
Yep.
And the storyline, I thought they did an outstanding job in the storyline.
They really did. And all of the stories as you hear upstairs, all of the quotes, those are actual quotes. So even though the upstairs is a theory, because when you get to the final room, it is the deathbed scene room, because to accurately tell history, you have to tell the good and the bad. I mean, Lincoln was assassinated. You'll get a lot of interesting questions where people will ask, did he ever wake up? Did he ever open his eyes, say anything? He never did in those 9 hours. So the entire floor is a theory, but that theory is the whole story is based on actual quotes from people who knew Lincoln throughout his life. So my hat's really off to Taylor Studios, Ron Keller, and Ann Mosley, who spent countless hours putting together that story.
We have some quotes here which are necessary to give. It has to do with what I always call the capitalistic system, and we don't go on the air without sponsors. Mr. Ash? Right back live in the studios here at WLCN. The program is Viewpoint, that highly vaunted much listened to by 2 or 3.
Our audience is growing.
Yeah.
3.
Our guest this morning is Mr. Tom McLaughlin of a theater family.
Yes.
Tom does a very important job, has a very important job, and does a good job as director of our Lincoln College Heritage Museum, Presidential Museum. We're discussing that this morning. And by the way, sometimes you can stand right next to this tree and a limb will drop next to it and you say, oh, there's a forest. For instance, I have been to the Abraham Lincoln tomb twice. Once when I was a Boy Scout, those long years ago, and several years ago when I had a guest from Japan in our house. We should take better advantage of these things that are right under our nose. For instance, it's been a long time since I've been to New Salem.
What's that saying about a prophet is without honor?
Yeah, that's right. I found that out last night.
I meant to ask you about that ride. Did they came around a block, I'm assuming, and came and picked you back up. I'm wondering what that conversation was like on the ride home.
Well, after wasting them for the couple of extra words. No, they didn't come around. You see, they were in the procession going off the airbase. At the Springfield Capitol Airport, and there's lots of people there, and there's a long procession going on to go home, and they were headed off the base, and there I stand wondering what I'm going to do besides call a cab.
I guess if you're still on the base, you could re-enlist. It's like, well, I'm here, might as well.
Anyway, back to serious business, although it was serious enough last night for a short time. We're happy to have Tom McLaughlin with us. We have so much going on, so I got to fool around here talking too much and digress from my original point is that we have this right in our own backyard, and a lot of people live here and haven't taken advantage of that.
Absolutely.
And I would urge you to set aside some time to go out there and see this, because it's a spectacular way to relive Abraham Lincoln's assassination and his life. So go ahead, Mrs. Busby.
I have a friend who was born and raised in Springfield, and she went to Lincoln's tomb while she was a student at Western Illinois University. And that's how it is no matter what city you live in. You look to the other town to see something interesting. It's a shame.
Well, I sometimes call it backyard syndrome. Sometimes, kind of like what Bill was just saying, when it's sometimes in your own backyard, you forget it's there.
Yes.
And so I try to get out to speak to civic organizations. I'm very thankful you had me here this morning to help get the word out, but a lot of times it's just reminding we have this beautiful gem in our community, and it's right here in your own backyard. The cost is very low, and it's a great story, and especially if you live here and you're born and raised here, just our community's connection with Abraham Lincoln is so significant that it's a great story.
Another genre entirely right in our own backyard is Creekside Environmental Studies Center.
Absolutely.
A wonderful place to go up and see. We don't have any museum up there, but you're communing with nature, and Dr. Dennis Campbell has done a magnificent job up there creating that, and it's going to be nothing but get bigger and better. Right in our own backyard.
It should. It is. Like you just said, it's a wonderful place. It's got, the butterfly house they have, and all the beautiful things of nature. And it's a learning center as well. I know that at Lincoln College, a lot of classes will go out there to do some research and study on different. It could be soil samples or whatever it may be. I don't know, but it's just like Bill said. It's just this wonderful thing we have right here in the community. It's just trying to remind people, saying that we have this here. Just please take advantage of it and see.
Tom, we're talking about the museum in particular this morning, but in the great Lincoln College family, my take is that you are part of a unique group of dedicated professionals in the teaching of our kids who come here at Lincoln College. We have what I term to be as a close, well-knit faculty group. whose common goal is to do the best job they know how for the kids.
Absolutely. It's always exciting. I love the time of year when the students come back because it's over a couple of days because some athletic teams will come back or upperclassmen. Everybody doesn't come back on the same day, but within 3 or 4 days, all of a sudden, just the energy is back on campus. It's like a light switch was turned on. Because all of a sudden, just all that energy and all these students are so excited to be there. And
last week we had President Gerlach and John
Blackburn, for the want of a better word.
Yeah, Blackburn. I'm sorry, John. Excuse me. And several people, actually, both listeners, did tell me how surprised they were at the financial figure.
Impact on the community.
The impact that the college has, because you all have to live in a house. You all have to go to the grocery store. You all have to have gasoline. You all go to the library,
Oh, yeah. Lincoln College is a major employer in town.
It was, I think, $41 million. Am I true?
Yes, that's close there, too.
Yeah. Annually, that the college impacts the city of Lincoln. Now, we're talking impact.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And plus, so you have that, which is certainly nothing to overlook, but you also have things like the museum and things like Dennis Campbell's Prairie. And
entertainment.
We're so lucky.
We put in a lot of prodigiously good entertainment by our theater students, our musicians in the fine arts department, and these are things that the community enjoy for little or no investment at all. Sometimes free will offering, sometimes they don't pass a hat. These are things we have right here in our own backyard, and it's better than spending your time at. Never mind.
Yeah, well, it works out. I know that, and the college has really reached out to the community. We want to be an integral part of the community, and I know that Dr. Gerlach has done a wonderful job being at different events throughout the town, and it's just to increase our presence and that we partner with the town. As you said, we're a major employer. We have a very large financial impact through our employees and through the students, but we want to partner with the town and have us both succeed.
Our kids did a public demonstration. Not demonstration. That's the wrong word to use
in this day and age.
Recognition would be better. Of 911. Our kids were out visual on the campus in a gathering, which is a neat thing.
It is. And
because those youngsters, 911 is not important in their mind because of their age factor.
The incoming freshmen this year would be about 18 years old, so they were toddlers when the actual events happened. So it's interesting to hear their perspective because they were alive, but they weren't.
They didn't know they were yet.
Well, they didn't live every minute of it like the rest of us did.
I really predict that 9/11 is something that will be commemorated
forever and ever.
Forever and ever, because it was, well, golly, I think anybody can tell you just exactly what they were doing at the time that those towers were hit. It was...
Many of us out here in the ether world will maybe be flicking the channel, like I did, and it came on this that's not the right word. Boy, the old fellow's in trouble today.
Well, you're still traumatized by being left and ignored by your friends.
And my humanity's been diminished.
And for those that aren't aware, we actually have in the Lincoln Heritage Museum, we have a section, a beam from one of the towers that's in the museum in the front area, and we're always welcoming the public to come see it and just to remember, and not just on September 11th, but any time of the year, just to remember the events at that time.
With those pictures visually ingrained in your mind, and to realize that here's an I-beam that was a part of that was falling. It's a little thing, but on the other hand, it's not a little thing. It's a huge thing. I've
not been out to the memorial out in out in New York City. But just imagining the sheer size and the scope of what had happened. You're right. The beam we have is about 2 feet long. It's a very small beam. It's very heavy.
I'm sure nobody
just
got
thinking the sheer
much
magnitude
more
of what
than
happened.
that. Yeah. Everybody would want a piece.
I always wanted to go to Shanksville, where they brought the plane down in Pennsylvania there. I've seen pictures of what they've done out there. It's pretty impressive. So that's not that far. I'd like to do that. But it's hard for me to drive to Burtonview anymore.
It's hard for you to get home from Springfield, too.
Tom, well, yes, there's that to be said. In your experience with this on the campus, have there been any unusual guests who have made any comments and so forth? I'm amazed when I look at the folks who sign in there as visitors. Just like up here at the Palms, I make it a point to look at those registration papers. People from all over this world. There's something unusual about this Route 66 mystique that draws people. I don't know. It's amazing. But have we had any unusual comments or visitors that you recall immediately?
Yep. As a matter of fact, I want to say it may have been earlier this spring. It may have been spring or the fall. I can't quite remember. There was a couple from Belgium that was driving Route 66, and they were going to take about 2 weeks, I want to say, to get out to Las Vegas, and they were going to get married. So they were, I guess, engaged, but I want to say they'd rented motorcycles or something, long-term rental, and they were just driving the entire Route 66. And usually if somebody starts in Chicago, Lincoln is usually towards the end of day one of that. We've seen most of the time we get a Route 66 visitor when they're doing the long trip. We'll see them in the afternoons because they started up there and they stopped in a couple different places. But those are neat stories, and I'm always curious when it's somebody from another country. What is it about Route 66? Thinking this iconic road in a different country that they'll take 2 or 3 weeks and see all of the sights you can see. But yeah, that's the story that definitely sticks out in my mind. That we wish them well and said we hope for an uneventful 2 weeks so there's no change of plans before you get to Las Vegas.
Yeah.
We never did hear back from them because we kind of wanted to know, say, well, did you get married? Did it work out? I hope. So I guess no news is good news, I hope.
I think that's the way to look at it, though.
Yeah. We'll just wish them well and hope everything's going great.
Speaking of Route 66, it digresses just a little bit, but I note, and I think this should be noted, there's somebody going to a great deal of trouble to create a convoy of military vehicles, some 60 or 70, from World War II on down, and it will give the folks a microcosm of what we have in rolling stock as far as military is concerned. And they're going to stop at the Palms and have their pictures taken across from Paul Bunyan and so forth. Then they're going to protest down to Lincoln, and they're going to do the traditional old 66 way. They're going to stop at the mill. So this Sunday, about somewhere in the neighborhood of 2:30 to 3 o'clock, they'll be gathered there at the mill, and it'll be an opportunity for people to come and look at some of these. Some of them are rather esoteric vehicles.
Absolutely. It's just another chance for people to come out and see the neat things that we have in Lincoln and the things that stop in on their way through. So,
you have besides the soiree, which is a big boost for us financially, and I mentioned ongoing that could be bequest made on behalf of individuals. Do we have any other great fundraising projects on the boards yet, Tom?
For the museum, we always have. It's an ongoing effort.
Yeah, the museum needs to sustain itself, and that's why I emphasize that. Don't take a thing away from giving to Lincoln College as an entity, but the museum needs to stand by itself.
Absolutely, and that's our goal, is to be self-sufficient. On top of the special events that we do, we still have the basic costs of just keeping the doors open and all that kind of stuff. So we have a newsletter that goes out. We have a Friends of the Museum program where when you give to the museum and you become a friend of the museum, you're actually invited to a special preview each year right around Lincoln's birthdays when we have a new exhibit opening up, and we'll have a special preview a couple days before the official opening. And just kind of we send different things out, our calendar of events. So there's a lot of different ways people can help out the museum. And of course, like you mentioned, if somebody wanted to make a bequest, because we really try to push the museum as being a community museum. We look at not only Abraham Lincoln, but his connection to the local community. Mm-hmm. So if people are moved by that and they want to help us continue to tell that story, by all means, we're able to do that through the donations we're able to get.
We could also use volunteers. Mm-hmm. This is pretty much a sedentary job. They don't work you to death for sure. You don't have to stand and greet people. I would urge people who have some time on their hands that would like to donate a couple hours a week. It'd be a nice way to fill your week.
Absolutely.
It beats sitting around with a glass of wine. Well, maybe not.
Sometimes, yeah.
Come to think about it, maybe
you want to rethink that? I don't suppose you can bring wine with you when you're volunteering.
I don't think so.
No. We kind of frown on that one.
I would think. The thing about the soiree that I think is fun, aside from the good that it ultimately provides, is in the olden days, you used to see men in black tie and women not in blue jeans. Mm-hmm. And, of course, that has passed as well. And it's kind of really like a throwback. It's fun to go to this soiree and see people get with their teeth brushed and their hair combed and good clothes on.
We call it gussying up.
It's black tie optional, but you do see a lot of tuxedos. You see a lot of beautiful dresses and gowns.
This may be my last year in my black tie. I'm having trouble with my fingers and the studs.
So. I understand. Sure.
Getting dressed is what was a 15-minute organization now become 40 minutes. So this may be my last go. Well, it could be my last go-around period.
Well, none of us ever know. None of us ever do. I could help you with those, but when Arthur sets in and your parts don't do what they're supposed to anymore.
If you had, besides money, of course, if you had one big wish for the museum, Tom, what would that be, perchance? Mm-hmm. That's a question right off of Mount Olympus.
That is a tough question. What I would love for the museum is I would love to, this goes back to the conversation of being self-sufficient. I would love to build an endowment for the museum so that each year we have funds to continue to build on the events we have. Mm-hmm. It would help us to continue cataloging our items and potentially even getting new items. But the biggest thing for me is I just want to keep telling the story, and I want to add to the story. And I just want, like we said, kind of defeat the backyard syndrome and remind people that we have this beautiful museum that's right here in Lincoln, and so people can come and experience what we have.
It should be known that we have, besides what is on display, we have a significant number of items in the vault that can be brought out for display on various occasions.
Absolutely.
And kind of rotate and make the displays go fresher.
A lot of items, they may not necessarily be related to Abraham Lincoln, but we do have a lot of Lincoln-related items. Thousands and thousands of items. The museum's been around since 1944, so there's been several decades that they've been collecting for this museum. It's actually the oldest Abraham Lincoln-related museum in the state of Illinois. It's just a great connection to Lincoln College. The museum started based on the donation from a Lincoln College alum, Judge Lawrence Stringer, who was class of 1887.
Lawrence B. Stringer.
Yes. He donated a vast collection of Lincoln memorabilia with the instructions, you need to open up a museum. So that's how this whole thing started.
I may be the only one left that remembers Lawrence B. Stringer. And I always remember he kind of looked like Mark Twain. A wonderful jurist, and he certainly had Lincoln College in mind when he started that very modest collection, and it's grown to what it is today.
You mentioned the word vault. If there hadn't been a vault when U-Haul burned, you'd have fewer things for your museum.
It was the administrative building.
The administrative.
But I want to say that was in 1968 or 69, somewhere around there.
Could have been. I can remember looking out the window.
When looking at the pictures, that was a complete complete. But the building burned down, essentially.
Yeah, totally.
Just the idea that artifacts did survive that just still astounds me. And we still have artifacts that have burn marks on them. So you can see where some things didn't make it completely unscathed through. But I've heard stories from Mr. Paul Beaver, who at that time was the museum director and curator, of when they went in and they were able to pull things out, and just that they were shocked that some things that did survive actually made it. So,
thank goodness.
Absolutely.
With appreciation to Tommy McLaughlin, our director of our Abraham Lincoln College Abraham Lincoln Museum. We appreciate your taking your time to be with us, sir.
My pleasure.
Since it was Abe Lincoln, we'll always try to come up with search around, try to come up with some sort of a quote. Boy, this hits the nail on the head. It did then, and it sure does more so today. Any man, this is Abraham Lincoln. Any man can stand a little adversity. If you want to test a man's character, give him a little power. How about that for some of today's politicians?
Something to think about.
Thank you very much, Tommy.
Thank you both very much.
Okay, you had something to say?
I wanted you to write that on a paper and send it to Michael Madigan up in Chicago.
Has someone